I'm going to show you the best way to manage your IT tickets in Jira. So I'm going to cover two things. The first one is going to be our queues, and the second one is going to be our ticket screen. And I'll go over queues first because that's where we actually see and pick what we want to work on or see what we need to work on first. And then once we go into that work item or into that ticket, that's when we actually look at the layout of it. And I'll show you exactly how I like to set it up for ultimate productivity. So jumping into queues first, there's really three queues that we need for every single ITSM environment. First one is all open tickets. Second one is all my tickets. And the third one is closed or like resolved tickets. I'll cover how to set up all three in this video. And to get to our queues, all we have to do is hit the little drop down on the left side. And you might have like a little queues panel, but I'm actually going to go to the three little dots next to it and click on queue settings. In here, we're going to create our three queues. And you actually might have some of these out of box, which is fantastic. You might just want to check some of the filtering and sorting on these. Otherwise, if you have them, great. You don't actually have to create them. If you don't have them, I'm going to walk through how to create them from scratch. So I'll click on create queue. I'm going to name this all open tickets. And then we will skip priority for now. I'll show you how to do that later. And then we're going to, all we really need to do in terms of filters is make sure that this is unresolved. We don't set any other filters for this queue because we want to see everything that is currently open or needs some kind of action or just isn't completed. And some of these may not need action from your team, but they may need action from a customer. So these are non-resolved tickets that are still outstanding by either your customer or your team. So you want to see everything that is not done in this queue. That way you could get kind of a bird's eye view on how many total open tasks that you have in your Jira environment. So that's going to be all open tickets. From there, I'm going to set a sorting order. And the order I'm going to use is SLAs. It's going to be SLA based. And I highly recommend that you use SLAs for your ordering. You want to have your most urgent or like your most, whatever is next on the list needs to be at the very top. That way your agents can jump in, click the work item, assign it to themselves, and immediately begin working on it based on what's at the top of the queue, not somewhere down below. And you don't want to use sorting based on your priorities. Priorities can work. They're just not ideal because let's say, for example, you had a medium priority request that just came in and you have a low priority request that's been sitting there for 3 weeks. And if you have stuff coming in above those low priorities, they'll never really get to the top of that queue. That's why SLAs are so great because they actually move those time to resolutions, time to first responses to the top. And if you don't have SLAs, I do recommend setting up something super basic. You can check out another video on our YouTube video for SLA setups and a full in-depth tutorial on that. But let's jump back into our queues. So for ordering, I'm going to select time to, I could either do time to resolution or time to first response. I think more appropriate for this particular queue is going to be time to first response because we'll want to make sure that we're at least getting to tickets quickly enough. I'll use time to resolution on another queue in just a little bit. So time to first response, and then all we need to do is manage our columns or add the columns that we'd like. For the most part, these are personal preference. I definitely recommend setting your issue type. That way you could identify the type of request it is. The assignee is fantastic, the reporter is great, and obviously summary is very important. And then the other thing that I would add is definitely your SLA here as well. So time to first response. And then sometimes you could add both SLAs if you're using time to first response and time to resolution. That way you have context on like what both SLAs are. Now, once we have all of that set up, all I do is hit the create button on the bottom and our queue is officially created. So I have my all open tickets queue and you can see that there's actually some resolved items coming in here. And that just means that essentially what our resolutions are set up incorrectly. It shows unresolved here, but if something is in a completed status or in a closed status, it should auto resolve, which means that there's actually something broken in our workflow. I covered this in a previous video for resolutions, so check that out if you're interested in how to fix those and if they're still showing up in your queue. So that's queue number one, that is completed. Let's go ahead and create the next queue. So I'll go back to my queue settings, create a new queue, and then we'll call this one all my tickets. And we're saying all my tickets because this is going to be a filter that we use that is conditional. So depending on who's logged in, it's automatically going to apply the assignee to that particular user. And the way we do that is by, number one, making sure the resolution is unresolved. And the next thing we do is go to our assignee, and I think I need to find that in our more filters. And then in here, we just say current user. Current user is me, and it's going to show you if you're setting this up, but whoever's logged in is going to be that current user, and that's the option that we want to select. And it'll update the queue here in a second. I have nothing assigned to me, which is totally fine. We'll test this out in a moment. Other than that, we have unresolved and assigned to me. That's it. We don't want to change anything else except for our sorting. And in this sorting, I'm going to use time to resolution. So the first queue, we used time to first response, which means that as soon as we can respond to the customer, let them know that we're working on it, some action is happening. Time to resolution is going to be after we've already responded, how long does it take to resolve a request? And the reason I'm setting it for the all my tickets is because usually after you've assigned it, you've already responded, and it's more relevant to see how long you have until a resolution after that point. And I'm going to do the same thing with the columns, time to resolution. I'm going to skip time to first response in here, and we'll create our queue. Now I'll quickly assign something to myself just to make sure that this actually does work. And I'll go back to all open tickets, grab one of these really quick. We'll head back to the queue that I was just looking at for all my tickets. And there we go. This queue is working. It is functional. If you'd like, you could test this out with 1 or 2 other team members. That way you know it's actually conditional for that particular user. So that's 2 queues done. Now we have the last one to address. Back to our queue settings. Let's go ahead and create the very last queue. And I'm going to say all closed tickets. And the reason we want to do all closed tickets is in case you've closed something out recently that you need to reopen, in case there's something that you want to reference that's been closed out a week or so, and maybe there's a similar request that came up that you want to just take a quick look at in terms of the closed request. This isn't super necessary, but it is very relevant for a lot of teams just to be able to skim through and see the most recently resolved requests and exactly what happened in them. So this time we're going to change from unresolved to resolution equals either, I guess you could select all of the resolutions other than unresolved, or you could do resolution does not equal unresolved. That's the other option. Both work in this scenario. I'm going to check all the boxes for resolutions. I think the more scalable approach would be to, if I clear this out, to do unresolved and then does not equal unresolved. Because you might also add more resolution statuses in the future. And if we don't select it again manually for this queue later, it's not going to apply. So resolution does not equal resolved is going to be the easier and sort of more scalable option for us. And now we have all of our completed work items showing up. So we've pretty much flipped and reversed how we're looking at these. At this point, we pretty much need nothing else other than maybe you want to sort these by created date or updated date. Totally up to you. I think updated date might be most relevant here. So I'll type in updated, and updated, I will make sure, there we go. We have our filtering and sorting done now. Everything's unresolved, and we could, again, modify our columns to whatever we like. Summary, issue type, reporter, assignee, and status are typically the most common. The rest are sort of optional and not super, tied down to like specific teams, but you could be very flexible in terms of what you want to see here. And now we have our last queue created. So those are our 3 primary queues that we need for every single IT team. From there, you could obviously split these out and like have things based on if they're escalated. You could have ITSM queue just for incidents. You could really go as crazy as you'd like here. I would definitely recommend keeping this very minimal. You don't really want to start creating a bunch of queues. All you really want to do is show your team exactly what they need to work on and anything that is still open. That's it. And that's why we created these 3 basic queues. We even have a few more here for like incident problem changes. I might even go and delete that just so my team doesn't trip up and see, kind of random stuff here and there. Because if they're looking at open incidents, they might miss open problems or open changes or open tasks. Whereas all open tickets has everything combined. So again, keep things simple, keep it very streamlined. And you'll notice that we have a little start queue. And this is actually something I recommend doing for every team. If I click the start options, I'll select the queues that I just created for myself. And now you'll see that anytime I open the queues, instead of going to view all queues and then seeing a separate panel, we save ourselves a click and actually see these in a specific order if they're starred for ourselves. And I actually really like doing this, and I recommend every team does it. This is something that is specific to each user. So you will have to go in and like show them how to actually star this and make sure that they do this. You could send out a quick loom if you like, but it is very helpful. That way you have the most relevant queues at your fingertips, and it kind of saves you clicks whenever you're going through and jumping through these queues whenever you need to. So those are all of our queues and how to set them up. Again, you can do other things outside of this. In terms of like setting those queues up, I kind of walk through the filtering, the creating of the queue. Kind of feel free to do whatever you'd like at that point to set up and implement these queues for your team. The next thing I want to cover is the actual work item or the ticket view. And there's a few very critical things that I really like to set up here that make a huge difference for the way teams are actually viewing and actioning on these. So the very first thing I'm gonna do, I'm actually gonna go to the configure page to show you what it looks like from the back end when you're setting this up. But the very first thing that I like to do is make sure that SLAs are at the very top. So inside of our context fields, make sure you have SLAs in here. If they're somewhere down here, if you don't have them set up, number one, make sure you set them up. Number two, make sure they're at the very, very top. And what this does is if I go back to the work item at the very top right, the first thing that I see is my SLAs, which is probably the most critical thing for me to actually view in this work item, because I'll know maybe I have an hour to respond or I have a couple hours to resolve this, and it kind of gives me it essentially gives me exactly what I need to know when working on this particular work item. You'll also see that there's a lot of other things here that are kind of littering this view in a way, where we have some accelerated incident resolutions, we have some suggestions, we have some playbooks, some related sources. I actually like to remove all these because a ton of them are very, very distracting. You might be a little bit confused as to where these are being removed, because if we go to configure, a lot of that stuff is actually not in this configure screen. It's actually going to be inside of our project settings. I'll show you exactly how to get there. You hover over your IT project, go to the three dots on the right side, then go to project settings. And in here, there's going to be a tab for features. And some of these features muddy up your screen when you're viewing the tickets. And I actually like to turn these off to clean things up quite a bit. So I'll scroll all the way down because that's where most of these features actually are. And I'm going to turn off project summary. I'm going to turn off playbooks for now. I'm going to turn off automation suggestions. I actually don't find these useful at all. Playbooks can be useful if you have a very specific use case. 99% of the teams I work with don't currently use them. They're a very new feature that are very limited, so there's not a lot of utility for them as of yet. I don't like similar requests panel. I've never found a really good use case for similar requests. If you really wanted to find a request that you knew you've solved that was similar before, usually you'll go in and actually manually search for that. Customer sentiment analysis, also like to disable this one unless you specifically need it. I do like to send posts when a work item is completed. There's like a little review that gets sent out to the end user. Those are fantastic, and if you're using them, I would leave this on. If you're not using them or if you're not tracking them, I would leave them off, or if you're never checking those reports, you could just turn them off. If you're using any alerting, you could leave these three on. Otherwise, you could turn them all off. These are only relevant for like on call, and if you're trying to essentially get like phone calls or text messages to your team for very urgent requests. Suggestions, what is this one? I think this one might be a little bit new as well. Yep, I would turn this one off as well. This is AI powered, mostly relevant. So you could actually see I'm turning a lot of these off. Some of these are relevant: post-incident reviews, change management problem, incident, and service requests. These are very core functionalities, and if you're using these, do not toggle them off. Otherwise, you will end up breaking some of your workflows. Views are great to have as well. If you're using them, you could kind of tweak your views however you'd like. They are somewhat relevant, but if you're only relying on queues, which in this case and in most scenarios, I would say most IT teams do, unless you have a specific use case of like seeing something on a calendar or seeing something on a Kanban board, you could also toggle this one off. It'll actually save you a side panel menu. So that cleaned up quite a bit. Let's go back to our IT ticket. And the views that I just toggled off are actually removed from this sidebar. So we actually have one less thing to look at and worry about here. And now that I'm here, I'll refresh my work item, and we should have some things that disappear. All right, so we had a couple of panels disappear. Looks like we still have related resources. We still have this ops guide. I could collapse that. I believe there's still a way to remove that somehow. It might be connected to Ops Genie or another tool that I have in here in this demo environment. Otherwise, it should be removed. And then we have a few different panels that got removed from the right side as well. So this drastically cleaned up our issue view, and it gives us a lot simpler of and a lot more focused of a view of what we need to actually action on. And whenever you're in here as an agent, usually you're changing and tweaking a couple fields, and then you're usually interacting and dropping comments and notes for customers and internal notes. That's kind of the primary function. And if you have a ton of stuff that's kind of filling up your work item and you have to scroll down to get to that activity panel, it does take a lot of time every time you open a request. If I'm looking at 100 of these per day and I have to go in, scroll all the way down to find them and kind of start digging through comments, it's going to take a considerable amount of time from my end to actually go through each work item and scroll past sort of all the junk. They kind of remind me of like sponsored or like Google ads whenever you do Google search. So you kind of just scroll immediately past them and go directly to the good stuff. So yeah, that cleans up quite a bit. Next thing I want to cover is exactly how I like to sort my fields. And this somewhat is preference. That being said, there is some relevance to how I like to sort these. There's a few that I like at the very top that are pretty critical and that most teams find very relevant. The very first field should almost always be reporter. That way you know who is submitting the request. And then right under that, I just like to add the assignee. That way both users are immediately linked at the very top of the work item, and anybody who clicks on it knows who submitted it and who's working on it. Makes it super easy, super simple. It's not buried somewhere down below. Request type is fine to have as well towards the top. Same thing with priority. Those are pretty critical fields that impact a lot of what a user does. And I typically like to think through, how much impact will this field have when I reference it? And the more impact it has, like a reporter, depending on who I'm responding to, whether that's like a manager or someone from outside of my company or a new hire, it's going to be totally different in terms of how I respond. That's why I'm putting reporter at the very top. Request type and priority are also very critical. It gives me context on what is being asked and the level of priority that it is. Major incident, this could probably be moved all the way down to this hidden when empty, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. Conference call, same thing. I might even remove this entirely. I think that's related to like Teams. Responders, probably not using that one, same thing. So I'm just going through kind of sorting these out. Chat channels, probably not going to use this one. Knowledge base is relevant. I would probably drop this one towards the bottom. That's your Confluence knowledge base that you could link relevant articles to. And I actually think it's super powerful. I just don't like it to get into the way of like the context fields. Alerting, again, if you're not using that, remove it. Same thing with stakeholders, Teams channels, Zoom. If you have relevance for it, use them. If not, don't. So I'll save this view, head back, and here's what I have now. We're keeping everything very simple. We don't even need to scroll anymore on this work item, which is fantastic. Big thumbs up because we have a lot less data that's going to be shown to us. And the great thing is that we still have a lot of context in this more fields section. And if something does need to be filled out here, all you do is pop it open, you click in here, and then let's say you drop in a source, put an email, and now there's a source. And now the source actually moves up to your details panel. So everything that has information and that is relevant shows up in that details panel, and everything that is empty shows up under the more fields until it is filled out. And this view essentially gives you a lot more focus in terms of what you're actually working on. It gives you the general information on the top left, your status and SLAs on the top right, more details and information, and then your activity in the center at the bottom. So instead of scrolling through, finding a bunch of stuff, take out all the junk that you possibly can from the screen. That way it makes it as easy as possible for your agents to come in here and actually do their job. So hopefully that gives you some insight on good practices around queues and work item setups. This is what I do for all of my clients. This is essentially how I recommend setting Jira up. It's not identical to every client environment that I've set up in the past, but this is very similar to how I would approach and some of my thought process behind how I actually set up ITSM in Jira.